Imagine this. You wake up one morning in a stranger's home. The photos on the wall show your face, but the smile looks unfamiliar. The bookshelves are filled with titles you wouldn't read. The clothes in the closet fit your body, but not your soul. And when you speak, your voice echoes back with phrases you don't remember learning. Automatic, hollow, rehearsed. You try to piece it together. You try to recall when this became your life, but something unnerving dawns on you. There wasn't one big moment, no sudden shift, just a million small, invisible choices. The way you answered emails. The people you stayed silent around. The habits you didn't question. The roles you accepted without protest. The fake laughs. The mindless scrolling. The fear you named productivity. You've practiced this person for so long, they became real. You became them. But were they ever truly you? We grow up believing identity is something we discover, a fixed truth buried deep inside. But what if that's a lie? What if you're not who you are, but who you rehearse? What if every thought, every habit, every reaction is a brushstroke on a mask you've forgotten is still just a mask? And if that's true, then who are you beneath all the repetition? What would remain if you stopped practicing who the world taught you to be? Let's go deeper. You were not born knowing how to behave. You learned it. You learned it in bits and fragments, through glances, rewards, punishments, subtle shames. You watched the adults around you, how they moved, how they reacted, how they survived. You learned that smiling when you didn't feel like it earned praise. You learned that hiding your confusion made you seem mature. You learned that pleasing others made life smoother. Somewhere along the line, you confused adaptation for identity, and then without noticing, you became the mask. Carl Jung called this the persona, the face we present to the world. A carefully curated illusion of control, likability, normalcy. It's necessary for survival. But when the persona hardens, when it calcifies over the true self, something tragic happens. We forget that we're pretending. We begin to believe that this surface is all there is. You are not who you think you are. You are a collage of practiced behaviors. Nietzsche once wrote, "We are unknown to ourselves." His words weren't meant as poetry. They were a diagnosis, a warning. Most people live and die as characters they did not consciously create, prototypes manufactured by culture, religion, school systems, and algorithms. Think about it. You didn't choose the language your mind thinks in. You didn't choose the rules for what counts as success, or the template for a good life. You inherited those frameworks. You absorbed them before you had the chance to examine them. And every time you repeated them, obediently, silently, unconsciously, you reinforced the illusion that they were you. But repetition doesn't equal authenticity. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that the self is not a unified, stable entity, but a restless will, an ever-hungry force blindly seeking satisfaction. In his view, your thoughts and behaviors are not freely chosen, but driven by this underlying will, shaped by suffering and desire. So even when you think you're being yourself, you may just be reacting, chasing relief, avoiding pain, mimicking safety. Your patterns were not born from truth. They were born from survival. Jean-Paul Sartre took it further. He said we are condemned to be free, meaning we are free to choose who we become, but that very freedom is terrifying, so most people run from it. They take refuge in roles, expectations, and systems. They choose comfort over confrontation. They become what Sartre called bad faith, a life where you pretend you have no choice, so you never have to take responsibility for your existence. In other words, you become who you practice being and then forget it was ever a choice. The problem isn't just that you've mistaken habit for identity. The problem is that the longer you play the role, the more it plays you. Modern psychology reinforces this. The science of neuroplasticity shows that our brains reshape themselves based on repetition. Neurons that fire together, wire together, which means every time you avoid conflict, you train your brain to fear truth. Every time you downplay your needs, you reinforce your belief that they don't matter. Every time you fake a smile, you lose muscle memory for authenticity. And then you look in the mirror and wonder why you feel like a stranger to yourself. But this isn't about guilt, it's about revelation. You didn't do this to yourself maliciously, you did it reflexively, quietly, while trying to belong, because here's the hidden tragedy. The world doesn't want your true self. It wants the version of you that fits, the version that doesn't disrupt the machine, the agreeable worker, the predictable partner, the obedient consumer. So the culture rewards your false self. And you reward yourself for being rewarded, but a reward for an illusion is still an illusion. The question now is, what happens when the false self starts to crack, when the mask gets heavy? When the applause feels hollow? What happens when the identity you practiced no longer protects you, but imprisons you? Let's go deeper. At first, the mask feels light. You wear it because it helps you navigate the world. It opens doors, it makes people smile, it keeps the peace. You get praise for it. Promotions, followers, approval. It becomes easier to play the part than to question the stage. And for a while you think you're winning. But what happens when the applause stops? Or worse, what happens when it keeps going, but it no longer means anything? You see, the false identity you've practiced doesn't just distort your self-perception, it rewires your reality. It hijacks how you interpret the world. This is where the danger lies. You begin to curate your experiences to protect the image, not the self. Your choices become less about truth and more about reinforcement. You stop asking, "What do I believe?" and start asking, "What should someone like me believe?" This is the silent collapse of authenticity. From a psychological standpoint, this is fueled by confirmation bias. Your mind constantly searches for evidence that supports the identity you've constructed. If you believe you're the responsible one, you'll ignore your exhaustion. If you believe you're the funny one, you'll deflect pain with jokes. If you believe you're unworthy, you'll sabotage anything that contradicts that belief. Your perception becomes a loop. But the loop isn't just internal. Culture rewards it externally. We live in a world of roles and labels, like the overachiever, the empath, the introvert, the hustler, the survivor. These identities give people comfort, community, and control, but they also become cages. They trick you into consistency even when your soul is screaming for change. And then comes the loneliness. Because deep down, a part of you knows no one truly sees you. They see your practiced self, your public version, the curated display. Even in love, even in friendship, when someone says "I love you," a quiet voice asks, do they, or do they love who I've been pretending to be? This dissonance is emotionally corrosive. It creates what psychologists call self-alienation, a disconnect between your outer behavior and inner truth. Over time, this disconnection becomes unbearable. You feel drained, unmotivated, restless. You feel drained, unmotivated, restless. You might call it burnout, depression, anxiety, but often it's not a mental illness. It's the body mourning its own betrayal. The betrayal of becoming what the world demanded instead of who you were. Neurologically, this becomes self-reinforcing. Each repeated behavior strengthens certain neural pathways. The more you fake confidence, the harder it becomes to admit fear. The more you suppress anger, the harder it becomes to access boundaries. The more you deny your desires, the more they rot into resentment. Eventually, you're not performing a role anymore. You've become a simulation of what you thought would make you lovable. And society keeps you there because simulated selves are easier to control. Advertisers love predictable desires, employers love consistent personalities, institutions love obedience wrapped in smiles. But here's the paradox. The more you conform, the less you belong. Because true belonging can only happen when your real self is seen. And if you've hidden it for years, even you might not know where it is anymore. This is the hidden tragedy of modern identity. It's not just a psychological problem, it's an existential one. As Viktor Frankl once said, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. The practiced self becomes addicted to distractions, doom scrolling, binging, overworking, gossip, drama, anything to keep the truth at bay. Because if you stop moving, if you sit in the silence, something terrifying might emerge, a self you don't recognize, but can't stop remembering. That's when the mask starts to crack. That's when the practiced self begins to feel like a prison. And that's when rebellion becomes necessary. There comes a moment when you can't pretend anymore. The applause no longer soothes you. The compliments ring hollow. The carefully curated life feels like a performance you forgot how to end. You stare into the mirror and feel a strange ache, not because you hate who you see, but because you've outgrown them. Because you've worn the same mask for so long, it's begun to suffocate the very soul it was meant to protect. This is the moment of rebellion, not against others, against the version of yourself you've been rehearsing, and it begins with a simple, brutal truth. You are not your habits. You are not your past. You are not even your personality. You are what you choose to repeat. That means identity is not found, it's forged. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The rebellion begins when you stop calling your programming personality, when you stop mistaking trauma patterns for identity, when you stop hiding behind traits that once protected you but now only limit you. It begins when you ask, "Who am I without the fear?" You must unlearn the scripts, not burn them in anger, but study them with honesty. Ask yourself, what have I practiced into existence? Who taught me to be this way? Which behaviors were rewards for obedience, not expressions of truth? Then start rehearsing something new. This is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the performance began. Rebellion is not loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as telling the truth in a room full of liars. Sometimes it's saying no when your old self would have begged to be liked. Sometimes it's sitting in discomfort instead of numbing it with distraction. Sometimes it's staring into the eyes of the practiced self and whispering, "You're done." The key is repetition, with awareness, because just as your brain was wired through repetition, it can be rewired through conscious practice. This is neuroplasticity in its most sacred form, self-directed evolution. When you practice authenticity, even in small doses, you begin to restore the muscle memory of your soul. You don't need to know who you are in full. You only need to practice becoming someone you're proud of. That might mean disappointing others. That might mean being misunderstood. That might mean walking away from people who only knew the mask. But it also means freedom. Real freedom. The kind Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of, the terrifying, glorious burden of authorship. The rebellion is not a rejection of the self, but a reclamation of it. It's what Nietzsche called becoming who you are. Not who you were told to be, not who you've been applauded for being, but the unedited, unpracticed, living truth underneath it all. You'll stumble, you'll forget, you'll fall back into old rehearsals. But each time you catch yourself, each time you make a new choice, you weaken the grip of the false self, and you begin to write a new script, one act at a time. This is not self-help, this is self-rescue, and it doesn't come from a guru or a course or a book. It comes from noticing, choosing, repeating. So the real question is, what are you willing to practice today to become who you were always meant to be? What if everything you thought was you was simply momentum? Not destiny, not design, just a series of practiced responses that hardened into identity. A snowball of repetition rolling downhill, picking up labels, fears, coping mechanisms, and borrowed beliefs until it became something that looked like a self. And what if that self was entirely optional? Here's the ultimate, most unsettling truth. There is no fixed you. You are a verb pretending to be a noun, a process pretending to be a person. You are a becoming, not a being. This isn't spiritual poetry, it's neuropsychological fact. Your brain, your thoughts, your behaviors are not static, they are plastic, literally. Neuroplasticity tells us your mind is in constant flux. Synaptic pathways are strengthened or pruned based on what you do repeatedly, what you practice, and over time what you practice becomes what you believe. You are not who you are who you train yourself to be, and that realization can either crush you or set you free. The crushing part is this: all the excuses fall away. If you are who you practice being, then the self is no longer a story you inherited. It's a decision you're making every single day. Passivity becomes participation, victimhood becomes authorship, comfort becomes compromise. But the liberating part is far more powerful. You can become anything you practice with intention, integrity, and repetition. You can practice courage until fear loses its grip. You can practice honesty until your tongue forgets how to lie. You can practice worthiness until your body stops flinching at love. You can practice stillness until anxiety forgets your name. You can practice self-respect until the world learns how to treat you. The ancient Stoics knew this long before neuroscience caught up. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." In other words, you are stained by your inner repetitions, but stains can be washed. New colors can be chosen. Even Buddhism, often misread as passive detachment, carries this same fire. The doctrine of anatta, non-self, says that clinging to a permanent identity is the root of suffering. Because when you believe this is just who I am, you imprison yourself in a role that was never meant to be permanent. You resist change, you fear freedom, you confuse your pain for your personality, but the self is not a prison, it's a palette, and the brush is in your hand. This realization reframes everything. Healing is no longer an excavation, it's a rehearsal. Transformation is no longer a mystery, it's a method. Identity is no longer a treasure to find, it's a song to write. Yes, you were shaped by forces outside your control, trauma, culture, childhood, expectation. But you are not powerless. You are not a static sculpture molded by the past. You are a river. You are motion. You are choice, layered over breath, layered over practice. You are not who you think you are. You are who you continue to be. And if that's true, then every day is sacred. Every habit is a prayer. Every repetition is a vote for the person you will become tomorrow. So ask yourself, right now, what have I been rehearsing that no longer serves me? What version of myself have I practiced into existence, and am I still willing to wear it? Because the mask doesn't fall off on its own. You have to set it down. You are not bound to who you've been. You are only bound to what you keep repeating, and freedom begins with a pause. Somewhere deep inside you, long before the layers and the masks and the rehearsals, there was silence. Not emptiness, but potential. A voice untrained by expectation. A rhythm untouched by repetition. That voice is still there, buried maybe, but breathing. Every day, the world asks you to rehearse the version of you it prefers. But every moment is also an invitation to choose otherwise. You don't need to burn down your life to begin again. You only need to become aware. To pause before the reflex, to breathe before the performance, to ask with radical honesty, is this truly me or just my momentum speaking? You don't need to have it all figured out. You only need to be willing to practice truth, even clumsily. Because the self isn't found in the mirror. It's found in your micro decisions, in the way you speak when no one is watching, in the thoughts you let repeat, in the patterns you interrupt, in the truths you dare to live even when it costs you comfort. So if you remember nothing else, remember this: you are not who you think you are who you practice being. And today is practice. Choose with reverence, repeat with intention, become with courage. The mask can fall, and what remains might finally feel like home. If this message stirred something inside you, if you're ready to stop rehearsing the version of yourself that no longer serves you, then this is just the beginning. Every video on this channel is a step into the deeper layers of who you could become. So pause, breathe, and when you're ready, subscribe. Because together we are unlearning the noise and practicing truth. And in the comments, tell me, what's the one habit, belief, or mask you're ready to stop rehearsing today? Your story might be the mirror someone else desperately needs.